Good morning and welcome to Over the Target. We've got a really special show this morning. Speaking with us this morning is friend and colleague, Epoch Times Senior Editor and host of the fantastic show, American Thought Leaders. I've been on his show a couple times, and today I get to turn the tables. So welcome, please, Mr. Jekielek. Jan, thank you so much for being here with us this morning on Over the Target.
Well, actually, that's a bit of misdirection there, Lee. You know, I think I'm actually going to be asking the questions this time. As much as I love to answer them once in a while, we're going to shake things up a little bit here.
All right. Okay, let's go. Let's do it. I'm used to fielding your questions anyway, so this should be fun, different but familiar.
Let's talk about Over the Target. You know, I've enjoyed watching the show. I have a terrible, terrible sense of the passage of time. It's been going for a while, you know, a number of years now. And I don't know, like, what do you think about this course of this show?
Well, we've had a fantastic time. I mean, first of all, as I say oftentimes during the show, it's a real pleasure to work with the team. We have just an amazing bunch of people. And of course, most people never see them. May, Victor are with us right now, producing the show. We've had other great people. We've had Aaron, Melina, Abby, just tremendous people. And they're really the heart of the show, all the production they do, all the great stuff they do. Because I've really been learning on the fly. This is not my, believe it or not, this is not my natural medium, being in front of a camera, not like you. So it's been a great experience getting to learn so much, and of course all the different great guests that we have coming on, and that's a real pleasure too, getting to work with different people and learn from different people and ask them questions. And sometimes it's very serious, very in-depth stuff, and sometimes it's a little, I wouldn't say silly, but some of the times, you know, we have a fun back and forth, nice repartee.
Is there one particular instance that you remember that really is memorable that we could remind our viewers of?
I mean, there's a lot, but the one that I always come back to is you know, there are times when I've gotten really emotional just listening to what some of our guests say, and I think for me probably the most emotional time was hearing was speaking with Dr. Scott Atlas, and I know that you've spoken with him before. And he was just talking about what it was like working in the Trump administration during COVID. And, you know, of course, he was, speaking of Over the Target, I mean, people were targeting him all the time. They were trying to ruin him and destroy him. And, you know, that was tough for him. But then just hearing him, how much he cared for people and how much, you know, he was there to serve his country. And he's like, you know, I never really thought about it before that I would be in this position. And here I am. And I'm out there. And what's happened to our country and what happened during the COVID period. And I just remember just asking him questions. I choked up at least a couple of times, you know, and there are times when I've gotten, you know, when people speak about very emotional issues, but that's the one that really sticks out in my mind. And what a great guy, what a heroic person. We've been so lucky to get to speak to people like that, hearing about their love of country, their love of fellow human beings, and the good and important things they're doing to you know, to protect us and to make the country a better country, to make the place a better place, and the different struggles that they encounter. So that's been such an honor, you know, to get to meet and speak with people like that.
You know, with him, the thing that really, really struck me is he saw things very clearly, and he struggled with this idea that, you know, he was able to affect some small change, but really wasn't able to shift things into in a more rational direction. It was very difficult for him. Why don't we do it a bit of a different way? Why don't we switch to the other side of the coin? What about sort of a hilarious moment or a funny moment in the show?
I think the funniest person and who was very popular was Kurt Schlichter, who's a novelist, and also, I mean, he's a stand-up comic, so he's very good. He had a new book out, which was about, you know, not a funny subject. It was about the you know, the life of unfortunately, armed conflict in the United States. This was part of it. And, you know, but he was just a very funny guy, very engaged guy. The audience loved him. I love him. I've known him for a long time. And so that was really great. I got to laugh a lot. There's other people I've gotten to laugh with, and I know that you know Mike Benz too. And Mike is not speaking about a funny subject either. You know, the whole of society's censorship consortium. It's not funny, but Mike is a brilliant guy, and you know he's focused on this topic, and he comes out with these with these great lines and great figures and metaphors, the way to explain different things. So it's always been a real pleasure to speak to him. And I think the audience really likes it too, when we have, you know, people who are speaking about serious things, but when they're funny too, when they're engaging, people will get a huge kick out of it.
You talked about, you know, the most memorable moment. You talked about, you know, the funniest moment. What about something that was sort of monumental? Maybe you learned something significant. Is there something that comes to mind?
I think Mike Benz has been really revelatory that way. I mean, we spoke with Mike early on during his research. I'd met him in Florida at an event, and I was really, because, you know, Jan, this is how we met, right? We were speaking about Plot Against the President, the book I published in 2019. And so that's something that you and I have been speaking about for a while, the different things that the intelligence agencies have been doing regarding for Donald Trump and his aides and Trump supporters, but just to see the depths of it, and just to see how it's organized, the extent of it, what he calls whole of society censorship. And this is really profound, because we understand how different things come about. What censorship is about, it's not just about stopping you and me from having our posts broadcast on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. The important thing is also to be able to gather information. And I say that not just as journalists, but as citizens. How do we make decisions? How do we make decisions for our family, our communities, and for our countries if our information is being limited? And of course, this is one of the things that Dr. Atlas was up against as well. How do I get this really important message out there? Because people are losing their lives, right? People are dying. So there is so much at stake in this. And actually, I think that as a whole, that's one of the things that I've learned at Over the Target, doing Over the Target, speaking with different people, the extent of this. Because, you know, as a writer, it's very easy to get caught up in your own thing. And this is really important. I'm writing this and I'm writing that, and some people are reading it. But to get to talk to people and to have an audience and people who are responding, that's a very different thing. Getting a sense of how profound this is, and also how grateful people are for audiences are for providing this information, for giving them access to important information.
Lee, you know what I'm thinking right now as you're speaking? Has your thinking changed since you've become a host because of these interactions in any way that you can kind of tell us about?
The things that I've always liked about writing and reporting is getting to ask people questions. And it's funny whenever you and I speak, because we're both sort of asking questions of each other, and then we're kind of responding, and it's sort of, you know, it's a very nice conversation, because it's kind of going all over the place, and it lasts a long time. So I know that I've learned a lot in bits and pieces. The most important thing I've learned is, you know, people in my neighborhood and people around I meet, and they say, "Oh, I watch your show." And I'm like, "Really? That is so great." Of course, you know, it makes sense. There are tons and tons of people who rely on the Epoch Times, and that's really profound. You know, seeing like how important that is to people, how much people need and want that information, and how much people have been looking for it. It's given me, how do I put this? It's made me, and I'm generally a pretty optimistic person, but I think that this has made me more optimistic, knowing that people want this information, and that people, you know, as we see on social media, people produce information as well. So yeah, just having a larger community people at the Epoch Times, the guests we've had on and over the target, but also the audiences too. It's really profound because, again, as a writer, you don't have a lot of access. You don't have a lot of understanding of who's reading you, and you're always grateful when they are. But with this, with the broadcast medium, it's very direct, and you hear very quickly, and it's headying. It can be headying as well.
I'm really heartened to hear that doing these interviews, some of them are very, very challenging ones, like you mentioned the one with Dr. Atlas with Scott, but that you've become more optimistic in the process. Because I think in our discussions, I tend to be the more optimistic one.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. One of the important things that I think that people value, and that I've found on over the target, is that tell people what's going on, because if we don't have that information, we can't figure out exactly how to get out of the bad places where we found ourselves the last several years. So I'll describe something to people. I'll say, so this is going on and that's going on, and there's no way that's going to happen. And people are like, I thought you were optimistic. I said, I am. I'm really optimistic. I'm optimistic that we will overcome. We will not only survive. We will not only survive the darkness, but we will rekindle the light. Maybe not me and you personally, but it will be lit. But to get there, to get to that place, we have to see it clearly. Even though I recognize that a lot of the times what I describe, people are just despondent. I'll let you in on something. Speaking of depressing people, so with Plot Against the President, the subtitle is the true story of how Congressman Devin Nunes uncovered the biggest political scandal in U.S. history. Well, guess who's never read the book? Former Congressman Devin Nunes. And the reason he hasn't ever read the book is he's just like, oh no, I mean, I lived through that nightmare. I mean, you think I want to relive this again? No, I'm not going to. So he knows the whole story. It's like my wife. She knows the whole story. And so they don't want to reread it because it just gets people down. I'm like, no, you guys did your job. You did what you were supposed to do. And all praise and honor to you. And that's what I wanted to do. It's a really depressing story, what the bad guys did, but what the good guys did is a really optimistic story. A story about just a handful of people who stood up and did the right thing. And so that's supposed to be inspiring. And as I told someone, I realized at a certain point that Plot Against the President was a boys' book, by which I mean like these boys' adventure stories. I'm sure you know Robert Louis Stevenson.
Hardy Boys,
all of these things. I mean, now we cartoons, people talk about Scooby-Doo and stuff, but this is what, it's supposed to, and of course, it's not just boys, but we would call them boys' books because there are girls who are part of these boys' gangs too, right? And they get together and they figure out how to do the right thing. And that's an amazing thing. And this, of course, is what our great epics, our great epic stories are about too. I'm not saying I wrote a great epic story, but I'm saying that if we look at what the classical epics are about, right? If we look at the Iliad, right? If we look at the Bible is a story about it's about a very large group, right? Starting with the patriarchs and coming down to the present day. But these are boys or men, right? And they band together and they do the right thing. They're against evil. They do the right thing. They worship God. I think that the source of our optimism is seeing clearly and speaking clearly about what we're looking at and what we're up against.
Well, one of the things that I found particularly optimistic, I guess, is just a kind of sense of, some people might call it serendipity, others might call it destiny, some might call it providence, but that it was Congressman Devin Nunes that came across these sort of unusual numbers of unmaskings back in the day, which prompted him to inquire, to investigate. And when he heard that, he got kind of this sense that this isn't something you should be really doing. right? That instead of sort of going away at that moment, he thought to himself, oh, I must have found something here. I must dig deeper. And so, you know, what's interesting is I do think a lot of people in that situation would have walked away because, well, it would have been a heck of a lot easier. And I think history has shown that to some extent. But he just somehow he ended up, he was the guy that was there at the moment and found that, and, you know, was able to uncover a lot of really important information that we're still in the process of figuring out today.
All right, people think, you may think I'm a little too pessimistic at times, but there are other people, especially after I describe how bad things are. People say, "Well, you're Pollyannish. I don't understand. You're whistling past the graveyard here. All this is really bad." But I mean, the point that you make about Devin Nunes, I mean, that's really kind of again, this is a heroic story, and there are heroic stories all around us, right? Look at people rising to the occasion, or just the fact of media, just the fact of Epoch Times and other dissident media, alternative media, free and independent media, however we want to describe it. Look, I mean, certainly government corruption didn't start with Donald Trump, and the problems with the administrative state did not start in 2015, 2016. But look at the kinds of, Mike Benz talks about the censorship consortium, the information that's being concealed from us. On the other hand, we have someone like Mike Benz who is talking about it. So the other side of it is the amount of transparency, the amount of insight that people have now. And it's not just a bunch of, it's not just a bunch of people who are fighting this in Washington, or people who are fighting it out of their basements. It's people who are watching over the target, of people who are watching American thought leaders, and people who are reading Epoch Times. So I think it's a really profound change, and something like, and that's why I wanted to write about Congressman Nunes, and that's why these are the subjects that I really like. But like, no, look, someone is standing up here, someone is fighting, someone is doing this thing that you may not have heard of, but it should inspire you and maybe move you in the same direction as well.
So Lee, I love how you were immediately, relating things to literature, because this is something that I've loved talking with you about in our private conversations. And the most memorable moment for me was when you watched an interview with me with Matthias Desmet, about his mass formation theory and just his general view of what's happening in our society and the world right now. And you said to me, this really reminds me of, I think you might have even said, this is like a modern version of the Grand Inquisitor, that chapter in the Brothers Karamazov. And I thought to myself, what? What are you talking about? It wouldn't have occurred to me in a million years. I remember reading this a long, long time ago, and I took a moment to read it again, and what a completely different view I have of this incredible piece of literature at this point, knowing what I know now, knowing what I know after 4+ years of American thought leaders, of Over the Target, of getting to know you and all these other amazing people who helped me kind of understand the world a bit better. So maybe just tell me this, like, did this just dawn on you? And I might add another thing, I couldn't help but think back to the fact that you were once the literary critic for the Village Voice. Yes. It's like, do people remember the Village Voice? I remember the Village Voice. Yeah.
I'm not sure, the Village Voice was a great paper in lots of ways. I mean, it was the first alternative weekly, and I looked at the Village Voice as still inspiring right now. People stood up and said, you don't have to agree with everything they said at the Voice, but people stood up and they spoke their minds, and it was an important place for me. Also, it was not just my hometown paper in New York, but it was my neighborhood newspaper. I grew up down there in the East Village, so getting to work at the Voice was great. And actually, one of the articles I published at the Voice that I was really proud of was by a novelist that many of our viewers will have heard of, David Foster Wallace. David, took his own life about 15 years ago now. And but he was a great novelist, brilliant novelist, and he wrote a long essay on Dostoevsky. And I just had a sense that he would have very interesting insight into Dostoevsky, who was a deeply troubled person in ways, but to my mind, the most profound novelist in our literary tradition. And of course, he's Russian. He wrote in Russian, but I see our literary tradition as being very broad. And the reason that chapter, the Grand Inquisitor, sticks out in my mind so much, I always think about it. And but the reason I was thinking about it watching you with Matthias Desmet was because there was just a calmness and a stillness about the whole thing, and such and it was so tender as well. And I know that a lot of people will strike them as strange that the Grand Inquisitor, I mean, the Grand Inquisitor tortures people, right? He comes back, and when Jesus returns to the Sevilla, when he returns that day, the Grand Inquisitor has burned, I believe it's 100 before, but it may be more. So he was a cruel, vicious man. But the tenderness comes from the silence of Jesus, right? The silence of Christ. And the Grand Inquisitor, in a sense, can't stand it, right? That's part of what's driving him up the wall. This patience and this, really the best way I can describe it is tenderness. And that's just what came across for me watching you and Matthias Desmet. Like, this is just an amazing conversation. And it just struck me. It's like, this is actually what we need. As much as we need people to talk about politics, we need this too. I've been saying this since the 2020 election, and it's only, something that came out of my mouth. It takes a while to come back and nestle in your heart, right? But the idea of saying, politics is very important for us, but there's no redemption in politics. By which I mean it doesn't generate the real meaning, the thing that nourishes our soul, the thing that produces things like tenderness and care and love for other people, right? That's just not the realm that politics inhabits. But that realm, the realm of our spirit, that's what literature, that's what our tradition has really built. Our biblical tradition, our tradition from classical antiquity, the masterpieces of world literature. This is, I think, really what people want to know, because we hear it all the time. You've spoken with people who said this, and that our primary struggle right now is not political, but it's spiritual. But of course, we look at this and go like, "Oh my goodness, this our primary struggle right now. It's not political; it's spiritual." But this has been the condition of mankind since there's been mankind, right? Our primary condition is spiritual. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with our place in the world? How do we deal with other people? So this is why, I think that literature, the written word culture, why it just gives us a different grounding. And I think it's an enhanced way to understand some of the things that we're going through now.
So reading the Brothers Karamazov as a kid, not really understanding much of what was contained therein, and thinking now to this, essentially, for those who haven't had a chance to get back up on the Grand Inquisitor chapter, basically the Grand Inquisitor decides that Jesus returns in a kind of an intermediary second coming, or I guess you could say, but it turns out the Grand Inquisitor, who's sort of in charge of the church there, he's not really interested in having him there, and in fact, tells him that this whole human free will thing has been a disaster, and that actually we've figured it out now, right? And this is, so I was thinking this is the kind of, bureaucratic class or something like. It's an amazing story for today.
This is, as I said before, I think it's probably been relevant throughout human history, this idea, because what the Grand Inquisitor is talking about is like, Jesus, you talked about freedom and free will, and you don't understand what these people really want. They're rebels in their heart and they're slaves. You curse them by giving them free will. You hurt them. We're the ones who really love them by treating them like slaves. And we look around and what COVID did to people, we can't help but look like, wow, it really it shocks us to see the different things that happen to people, our families, our friends. Some of the people that we work with, how this affected them. And so it was really time to sort of time to reconsider where we are and what people's spiritual condition is right now, because we're used to thinking, we would think, reading the Grand Inquisition, well, what do you mean that most people are slaves? That's obviously not true. We live in the United States of America, the oldest and greatest democracy in world history. People treasure their freedom, but during the COVID regime, we saw evidence of something else entirely. What then does the free will? Again, Jesus doesn't make the case for free will in Dostoevsky, right? He's silent. He doesn't say anything, and that's what's so incredibly moving about it, right? You can almost imagine him looking, somewhat piteously at the Grand Inquisitor, who's missed the entire point, not just of Christianity and not just of the resurrection, but has missed the entire point of everything. And so that's the kind of I think grounding that's so vital for us now to have, and with which to understand our actual surroundings in the world. Politics only goes so far, right? And at a certain point, politics will come up like, well, those people are nuts, and those people are tyrants, and those people, yes, that's true. But what is our condition, right? What is our community like? What is our country like? What are our individual souls like?
And something that just really struck me in there as well. There's so many layers to this story within a story. I've been kind of obsessed the last while with this idea that we're very influenced by others' views of us. We're very influenced by the need to belong. We're influenced by a sense of consensus. If we think that there's a consensus view, whether it's just our perception or it's even true, that will affect our behavior dramatically. We'll do even crazy things and almost unthinkable things to not be ostracized from the group. And this is all things that the Grand Inquisitor basically talks about in different forms in his speech to Jesus. Unbelievable, right?
We could read studies. We have read studies on it. We've spoken to people who do these studies, who do this, who do that kind of work, and it's very important. It's very interesting. But we see, we see that condition repeated again and again throughout history. It's like, okay, I know the numbers, right? We all know the numbers. How many people in the totalitarian society actually enlist themselves in the orgiastic violence of the psychopaths who run regimes like that? So we know the numbers. We know how most people don't want to participate, but somehow they're dragged along. But that's not enough. That's a certain level of information.
They need nourishing 100%. And somehow our culturally, if you don't mind, I'm going to pontificate a little bit here, but it's somehow like a bit of that nourishment has been stolen from us. Even just the understanding that we need it, that we need to look to the great books, that we need to look to history for inspiration. It's like, no, we just need to look forward. It's almost like, oh, that's all, old stuff that may or may not have relevance. And I even realized that myself, I kind of at some level bought into that a little bit, because I haven't been going back and, looking at the classics, looking at, sort of important literature that is looking backwards and seeing what lessons we can learn from history. And it turns out a lot of it is actually in there. Absolutely.
The line, there is nothing new under the heavens. That's absolutely true. But everything is new to us. Every joy, every passion, every time we suffer, it's new to me, right? And it's new to you as well. The different things that we go through, but to know that there is, not just that there's a guide how to get through it, but to figure out, to have a way to articulate to a way to articulate exactly what's going on. And this is what we find. And we find it in books, we find it in language, we find the expression, the clarity, we find this oftentimes represented in art, right? The different ways that people can render images, and we recognize them and we understand them, and we find something new in them. And it helps us understand our world, like a new image, right? A new image. Well, I never thought of it like that, right? An image is an idea. So now there's a new way to understand our world. So again, it's this enormous field that's almost that we've left unexplored. And one of the tragedies of the current time is we have been so much pushed into politics, right? No, you have to understand things in terms of the political thing. Here's the way the political layout is. Like, no, turn away from that for a minute, because you know what? First of all, you can't save the country on yourself. This is a long struggle, the political struggle. You are engaged, you are involved, but part of your engagement and part of your involvement is to feed your soul, build your soul, strengthen your soul. And people talked about this after the 2020 elections. And the terms that we usually put it was in like, go back and rebuild help build your community, you know, act locally. Act locally has national consequences, national results. You know, it's not selfish to go back and build your soul, strengthen your spirit as well. This is an enormous part of it. And you also recognize, like, you know, it's not about the 2024 election. Finally, I'm not saying that's not important, by the way. I think it's very important. But the world is not going to end in 2024. If we start talking like that, we're going to start sounding like Greta Thunberg or the climate change agenda people, right? That's the context that needs to be seen in. We're part of an extraordinarily long and glorious tradition of mankind, not just the United States. The things that people have suffered, the things that people have felt, the joys that people have enjoyed. You know, the idea that there's a record of all of this. All right, Jan, you know, I think we need to cut away for just 1 second. Anyone who's watching us on Facebook or YouTube, please make the jump to Epoch TV exclusively. You don't want to miss a single second of Jan Jekielek and me talking about our new show.
Any justification can and is used to shut down speech, and it always seems to be, you know, in the public good.
That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good,
30% of those polled believe that people who refused vaccinations should have their children taken away from them.
How can you arrest her? That's...
Could the police go and arrest someone just for posting on Facebook about a freedom rally if a larger segment of society weren't okay with it?
We can understand that that is the beginning of the march toward a totalitarian regime.